Hi, my name's Dave Price, and welcome back on the show. Our guest, Des Taylor from Landlord Defence. Des, how you doing, sir?
Doing well, thank you very much, and it's great to spend some time with you going over the subjects that most landlords love to hear about, although they fear some of the answers I'm going to give. But that's all part of the learning of being a landlord.
Indeed it is, and I'm always slightly nervous when I talk to you actually about the horror stories I'm going to learn. So,
Uh, well, it'll all be fun. What would you like to talk about today? What would you like to cover with me today?
first, I wanted to talk about selective licensing because this has been sort of introduced throughout the country in more places than ever before. I mean, it's actually happening in my area and some of the properties we manage as well. And I was just intrigued from your perspective, what do you think is driving this, and what's your actual take on it?
Right. That's a very big subject. And yes, you are right. Selective licensing is being introduced in more and more places. And for those who don't understand what that is, when the local housing authority, the council, makes a decision that they would like to license buy-to-let properties in a geographical area. So some councils, especially in London, at times have selected an area which is the whole borough. Doesn't sound very selective, I know, but that's what they've done, and it's been approved in the past. Some have had that removed at stages. So some councils had it stopped by the Secretary of State, and then they've had to make another application and put it in. But it will be certain streets, or it could even be one side of a street near where you are. There's one particular street where it's only on one side of the road because it's a rather large main road. But yeah, so it's an area they choose to license, and that's not similar. It's not to make a HMO. It's just anybody who rents a property. They've decided that they must license the properties in that area for whatever reason the council has chosen. Now, whether it's true or whether it's effective or whether it's not remains to be seen. But they make an application to the Secretary of State, and they decide to permit them to have the licensing, which are in areas where they believe housing needs to be improved. So you could be the best landlord in the worst street, but if they've decided that street needs to be licensed, you are not exempt, and ignorance is no defence in law. So many people have bought properties far away from their homes. People in the south have bought them up in the north of England, northeast, northwest, in the hope of making a lot of money. But in some of those areas, the housing has been a little bit deprived. They've not been well looked after. That's not only the owners of the properties, but that's the rented properties. So the council's way of dealing with it is to get the rented properties brought up to scratch and up to a certain standard. And selective licensing is driven by that metric and by those motivations, according to the justification they put in there. But for most people, what they see is it is a very good money generator. Okay.
The principle of the licensing seems to make sense in poorer areas to make sure there is good quality accommodation there. So it seems to make sense at face value.
It seems to make sense at face value. Absolutely correct. Whether it does, that still remains to be seen. And I haven't seen a scheme that has delivered at the end of the scheme what it said it would deliver at the beginning. And some of those schemes get renewed, even though they haven't delivered, which, it's a bit like paying somebody who doesn't perform in their job to keep their job and to pay them more. It doesn't make sense to me, but it happens.
Yep. So what do you feel is the driver on this from the council's perspective?
For some councils, it quite clearly is a revenue generator. By putting a licensing scheme out there, there is a certain amount of cost to doing that. And of course, running the licensing scheme, the legislation says the fee should only cover the amount of running the scheme. But clearly, some of them, looking at the prices of them, somebody from an accounting department probably has got involved and added a bit of margin and added some other extra costs of management, maybe a section of the CEO's salary into that as well, to bump it up. And so money is one of the reasons, because it puts millions of pounds into the environmental health department's budget, and they can use that for the scheme and to operate the scheme. But the other part, my take on it, is currently, if they want to enforce against a landlord who hasn't done something that he is supposed to do under the duties of the Housing Act 2004, they would have to go through enforcement under Part 1 of the Housing Act, which would be a hazard awareness notice or an improvement notice. Now, they can get some fees for those notices, £400, £500, £600, depending on which authority. Some it's even more for the issuing of an improvement notice. But what is by far the better revenue generator for that department is the enforcement budget. Because if you've got a licensing scheme and you can put license conditions in that selective license, then if the landlord breaches those license conditions, you can fine them, according to your policy, up to £30,000 an offence. Now, some of them are charging 5,000 and 6,000, some 10 and 15, but not having the license, which I must say, I don't know any scheme that is broadly advertised as well as baked beans are on the TV. So, nobody knows about it. So not having that license means that the landlord can be fined for not having the license. And most of these licenses are full of license conditions, which include such wide and open phrases such as the landlord will at all times keep the house in good repair. Well, good repair, well, that's open to somebody's viewpoint or opinion. So if the council says it's not in good repair, then they can fine you. And landlords are unwittingly signing up and applying for these licenses, receiving those licenses, not representing against them. And then the council's doing an inspection of the property, as they like to do. They're appearing at the property. The landlord may not have been in there for 6 months because the license says he doesn't have to inspect for 6 months. So it's 5.5 months in. And the tenant hasn't reported that something's broken. The tenant hasn't let him know that something's been leaking or hasn't said anything about it. The council's turned up and found it in disrepair. And the council can, according to the license, the landlord is under strict liability offence, guilty of not keeping the house in good repair, even though the tenant has failed to report it. And this is what's actually happening. It's happening throughout the country. And there are cases currently where the tenant has even admitted that they didn't report it. The tenant's admitted they've committed malicious damage to the property. And still, the landlord has received a fine and the agent has received a fine. And they're told, you signed up to the conditions, so you breached it. So you can imagine they're very interesting stories, but that enforcement budget, that's really good money for them because they're now getting money in for enforcement, which they can only use for more enforcement. So my take on it is selective licensing schemes, although on the face of it are very good, the purpose of them as they are a means to an end for lots more enforcement money, which is self-financing. So most of these enforcement teams are growing and growing and growing because of the more enforcement money, and because of that enforcement money, they're going to enforce some more. So that's the only guarantee in life that I can see for a landlord: more enforcement. That's my take.
Oh, and actually seeing it as a money spinner from the council, well,
Absolutely.
actually to increase the quality of the POS.
Yeah, it did. The quality hasn't. The quality has not improved. No.
Cool. I don't want to go into personal details, but we've actually had a letter from 2 properties I've got that I manage that are under selective licensing, where the council has advised me that the tenant put a pizza box in their normal bin.
Yeah.
That's bang out of order, and we need to get that sorted straight away.
Okay, so the first thing is the tenant has done something wrong, and that may be a warning letter. But in your license, please look at the license conditions. It will say that you are responsible for the waste management. And if you haven't contested that at representation and had that removed, and they're unlikely to remove it when a landlord represents, they tend to, again, it's not my making, this is what I'm seeing, until a landlord employs a professional to do a professional representation, that the council cannot pull the wool over their eyes. they don't tend to retract their or change license conditions. So, yeah, I wouldn't be surprised in knowing the area that you're in, and that you don't receive another letter telling you there's a notice of intention to impose a financial penalty for a breach of license condition if one of the license conditions is you will take responsibility for ensuring that the tenant's responsibility of putting the right things in the rubbish bin are not complied with. Yeah, so maybe you need to pop round there every week and check the bins before the dustman comes.
Ah, yeah, I must admit, I was gobsmacked by this and the control we have over if the tenant knows a pizza box should be recycled or not. It just seemed ludicrous.
Oh, don't worry about it. There's plenty of people taking plenty of money for things, and the council's just getting in on the game now.
Well, I was going to say it's one thing on the selective licenses, which, as you say, seem to be really under publicised. But the HMO additional licensing is also coming in more and more now as well. So, what exactly is that, and why do you feel councils are introducing that more and more as well?
Right. So additional licensing sounds like it's an additional license for HMO,
Yeah.
and in fact it is. But the law is very clear. If you've got 5 occupants and at least two of them are unrelated, then that creates a mandatory HMO.
Yep.
What additional licensing is when a local housing authority, the council, chooses an area, and they, again, like selective licensing, they're choosing an area, either all the borough or some of the borough, or selective streets of borough, where they want to license HMOs that have either 3 or 4 occupants in them. And there are many reasons they're doing this. One, I would say, is with the advance of many people wanting to get into property and the promotion of HMOs at lots of money, many people have got into the HMO business, and they've created HMOs without following all of the regulations. And it's harder for the council to identify those HMOs unless it comes up through council tax or complaints or one of the many databases they can find out. By imposing the additional licensing and making it an offence not to have a licence on that 3 or 4 bed, depending on the circumstances they've chosen, or on a converted house that's into self-contained flats, which is another reason for additional licensing. They're doing it for safety reasons, and I see why, because there's a lot of people getting into property who would normally have got into a buy-to-let and know they need to maintain it, have been educated by qualified and unqualified people to do houses in multiple occupation. They're doing those with 3 or 4 people. Quite often they're putting them into the property and they don't know anything about HMO management regulations, which have 7 regulations a landlord must follow and 1 that the tenants must follow. So the house in multiple occupation is created. The regulations aren't being followed. By having licensing, they duplicate some of those regulations as license conditions. But it identifies the properties that need to have a license, and those that really are making money but don't know what they're supposed to be doing, they're being found out because the property isn't licensed. So that's the first offence. Average fines are anywhere between 8 and 15,000, and then of course they haven't met with the management regulations.
So did you say the average fine was £8,000 for not having a licence?
No, anywhere between 8 and 15.
8?
And it really does depend on how many properties you've got and what the policy says of the local housing authority, how they went about calculating that. Oh, it's a minefield. Yeah, it's for not having the license. But stop for a second. I want to ask you this question, because many people think I fight the councils and I disagree with licensing and I do those things. Let me ask you this question. You've got your kids and your friend down the road normally takes them to school. Your friend down the road now has moved away. Now you're relying upon somebody else who says, I've got a minibus. They're going to take your kids to school and they're going to take a few other people along. You'd want to know that the driver had a driver's license, the bus had an MOT, it had a certificate of insurance, and they'd been DBS checked, wouldn't you, really?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, but they're taking your kids to school.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, in exactly the same way, if you think of the buy-to-let as being the family car and a small HMO being a people carrier and a larger HMO being a little minibus, you can understand we have different licenses for minibuses, different license for buses, a different license for trucks, but we've done the same with property. And we're just trying to make sure that those people who want to get into property on a rent-to-rent basis where they don't put any capital into the property, who have been told that it's very simple to turn a house into a HMO or into serviced accommodation, when in fact the serviced accommodation is not short term, it's people moving in or moving in for a job and it's their only place they live. The council needs to make sure those people are safe. The right smoke alarms are in place. The protected fire escape route is there. The locks in the doors are suitable so that you can get out of the property in an emergency without a key. That the electrical, gas and water installations are properly maintained, and the place has been designed for the type of occupation that's in it, because essentially you're turning one family home into multiple little homes, and they need to be safe, and it's really important. That's why they're doing it. And of course, as with everything, for those that don't comply, there's enforcement monies to be had. And for some of them, I see a lot of fines. I do help landlords, and I see a lot of fines, and some of them, I think the councils are completely justified and right. And then there are others, I do think, it's a bit like stacking up the reality of how much money can I stack, because I'm on I've seen a game show on the weekend where, the more you pick, the bigger the prize. Sometimes it's like that, but those are few and far between. So, but there are some councils that is modus operandi.
Yeah, because I can understand that an HMO is a higher risk vehicle accommodation than a single let. Yeah, it's just amazing of the amount of fines they're actually coming with. Yeah, I was shocked at those figures, 8 to 15,000 or so.
Yeah, they can go up to 30,000.
I'm going to say, because recently I've seen on social media you've been posting about a licensing scandal that's potentially coming our way. Can you tell me more about this, and should we be concerned?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, most local authorities are posting out licenses that you've applied for online. And even though you've agreed to be receiving everything by email, they still post them out and don't email them. So the first scandal is they're sending them out and people aren't receiving them. Now, you'll also see that I quite often post on social media. Every time I see a post person's trolley that's unattended, and I sometimes wait 15 or 20 minutes for them to return to the trolley because they've gone nearly a mile away to deliver the post. And this insecure trolley with lots of post in it sits there, and I've seen them leave it with post just sitting on the top for anybody to just pick it up and walk off with it. So the postal rule that came in over 100 years ago was based upon the postal system was as it was in its time then. Things were, you could rely on the Royal Mail, but the postal rule is both US and UK. This rule says that if I posted it, then it's assumed to be received or served. And when we serve notice under evictions, we have, it's deemed to be served. We do a certificate of service deemed to be served within a couple of days. Yeah. But I don't think that can continue, because the scandal is they are going out, apparently so, but why didn't they email them? Most of the local authorities are sending the document to a third-party company, so it's going via electronic transfer anyway, and that that company that does electronic posting is then printing it out, folding it using the various machines, and then putting it into an envelope and automatically putting it in the post. Now, what if that company didn't process everything one day? What if that company had a breakdown? What if some of the paper got broken and those particular letters didn't go out? When the postal rule was done, these systems didn't exist. And I know a lot about this because I worked in that business back in the 90s, where the banks and the various the catalogue companies would basically take lots of bits of paper and print people's statements, and machines would fold them and send them out in the post automatically. So I do understand that very well. And having been through processes where I've seen local authorities vouch that they have sent them and say that the proof is there because it's got the mark from the third party company, we don't know that third party company actually put it in the post. And
Yeah.
I do believe that we need a change in the law. I think there's going to be a big scandal because more and more I'm hearing from landlords and agents, I never received a document. And the first they know of the license is when there's a problem. And as the fact that it's being transferred electronically to a third party printer and packager, then it could quite easily have been sent by email. And what's more frustrating is the communications up to that point have all been by email anyway. So why, oh why, oh why? And of course, there's only a 14-day period a lot of them are giving to make the representation. So of course, if it goes in the post, then that takes 2 days. That's 2 out of your 14 days. So that's 12 days. And of course, it might have been delayed because you're out at work. So that's another day gone. So it's very much designed, the system is not broken, it's designed to do what it does and hold it back. But the other big scandal is the number of licenses I am seeing, both draft and final licenses, that do not comply with the legislation. There are rules about what the legislation says that the council must state on a license when it's a draft license. It must state the period to represent. And when it's a final license, it must state how you appeal. And the mishmash of nonsense that is being issued by multiple councils, and sometimes it's because there's been a change and they've changed the conditions and then they haven't checked their documentation. Some of it's the software. There is a big scandal. And if we look back at the famous Alan Bates versus the postmasters situation, Alan Bates, the reason he didn't ever get prosecuted is because he never signed the piece of paper. He never signed that the money was right. Those that did get prosecuted is because they signed some bits of paper when they should have stood their ground. But of course, they're busy, they're trying to do their lives and they're trying to get things sorted. Well, it's exactly the same for a landlord or a letting agent. We've got to get things done. They miss things, they sign things off, they accept things without realizing that they're incorrect. Now, if your driving license arrived tomorrow and your new driving license that you took a test for said that you could ride a motorbike, and then when that license came after taking your motorbike test, you didn't check it clearly, and it didn't say you could ride a motorbike. It said you could only ride a moped up to 50 cc's, and then you get stopped by the police because you're on a 125 cc. What would you say? Well, whose fault is that? Is that the DVLA for issuing the wrong license, or is that the driver for not checking his license? And I think this is the scandal that we're looking at that type of scale. And with a couple of councils I pointed it out to, we even had to take one right to the point of tribunal. And because they really wanted to not deal with it, they didn't deal with it until they had to produce a bundle of documents. And at that point, they wanted a discussion. And then when it was pointed out to them what was wrong, and what the problem was, the software couldn't do the necessary steps that it needed to do for them to change the situation. So what did they have to do? They had to take our advice, which was, well, if you can't make it right with the software, you can't blame the software because Paul Venables tried to blame everybody else. You need to do what the law says. If that means getting a typist to type a letter or type the document, get someone to do it. And we insisted on that. So there is a scandal out there and they're trying to cover it up. They're saying it's only certain situations. I'm hearing it all the time, but have a guess what? I'm seeing it more times than they're seeing it. So I know when they're telling me stories, and I absolutely know that it's happening in more places than they're saying. So they're not the only one. Oh, where have we heard that, Mr. Bates? They're not the only ones. So yeah, there's a scandal coming. Yeah, the press are already asking me. I ain't telling them anything. I'm not working for free on this one. No.
But you've got an amazing point. Yeah, I don't understand at all why the licenses aren't emailed out. That surely is cost saving for the councils. and they've got the technology there because everything else is done online.
Yeah, and they've got excellent systems that tell them when they sent it out, when it was delivered to the email box of the license holder, when they opened it, when they read it. You can't get any of that when you put it in the post. I really don't understand why anybody, although the law will suits it to be in post, but why wouldn't you send it in the post and email? Why wouldn't you do both? It costs you nothing more. And that would be having a duty of care to the license holder. That would be caring enough about it being right. What person in their job wouldn't want to do their job properly? Or maybe the system is designed that way. Who knows? But why are they not doing it? If you're a council officer issuing licenses, you have the ability to pick up the phone to the landlord and say, can I confirm your email address is the one on the application? And you have the ability to send that license via email and by post if that's what you want to do. But there is no excuse for not sending it by email.
Yeah.
None whatsoever. Email, I tell you what, I've had lots of things go missing in the post over the years. Nothing goes missing in email. Nothing.
Yeah. No, you're right. Just yeah, doesn't make sense at all. But
yeah, absolutely.
Anyway, so we've got an election coming up then.
Yeah.
Yeah, and some of the legislation that was being prepared has never actually happened at all. So what do you feel is the future under the new government we're going to have?
It doesn't matter who the new government is. We seem to worry about whether it's one party or another party. What we have to remember is that no matter who's in charge, little Johnny or little Kate or the elder man or older woman who's working into the civil service, those people's jobs don't terminate because the Conservative Party terminates being in charge. Yeah, they don't terminate because the Labour Party comes into power or the Labour Party terminates. The civil servants remain mainly the same. And most of them are career-minded people who have been working with various governments, and their aim is that we want better housing. We want better landlords. They don't seem to say we want better tenants. I don't know why, but we want better tenants too. And we want to make the conditions better for tenants. All landlords want to make conditions better for tenants. All landlords want something that works and is profitable, but not excessively profitable. The idea that landlords are raking it in is nonsense. So whatever happens, we're going to have more legislation and we're going to have more regulations. That is how Parliament has worked for centuries. We don't fix problems in the United Kingdom, and most countries don't. When there's a problem, we legislate against it. And by legislation, we create more and more things. So in the last 10 years, there have been over 500 pieces of legislation or regulations put into place, which, you know, that's more than one a week. You know, I think it's 540, 545 now. But it's more than one a week. I don't know which one you learned last week. I don't know which one anybody learned last week. But what I do know is that leads to more enforcement. And what we are doing and what's going to happen under whatever government is in place is that whatever offences that are out there that generally you would need to take to the magistrates' court, they will simplify the process into the local housing authority for the local housing authority to be able to issue financial penalties for the same offence without the need to go to the magistrates' court. It's already been suggested. It's already been put in the bill that never happened. It's already there. The biggest problem will be with the statutory enforcement, and the councils will need to recruit more and more people to make that happen. And there's going to be more enforcement. So if you don't get your tenancy off right, and don't do the things that are required, the council will be able to fine you. They're going to introduce more rent repayment order offences. They're going to overrule the Supreme Court judgment and make it so that more than just the immediate landlord, if there are superior landlords, those superior landlords can also have an application made against them for rent repayment orders by the local housing authorities where they're paying the rent, or by the tenant. And those periods, although again precedent was set in the upper tribunal, you can only get a maximum of one rent repayment order for a maximum of 1 year. They're talking about, and has been suggested by the mayor of London, that guy who he loves landlords as much as he likes eating his own food, his own vomit. He hates landlords, and it's suggested it should be 2 years. So that is going to make matters even worse. And for a landlord, the time has come for compliance. It really has. You've got to comply, and as hard as it is, my advice is, why wait till you get the enforcement to come and get professional help? Seek the help at the beginning. Employ professional help to get it right and make sure it's right throughout.
Yeah.
More enforcement. That's all that's coming.
Yeah, makes so much more sense rather than trying to do it later, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But so you as a person, you're assisting the landlords and agents that have got into trouble because they haven't been complying with some of this stuff. And in some ways, there's some real rogue landlords out there that should be closed down. I think most people would agree. Do you ever feel sometimes as though you're actually assisting bad landlords or criminals, even if they're actually breaking some of this legislation?
We help landlords who get into trouble. We've all made mistakes. We've all parked in a parking space we shouldn't have. We've all gone across the zebra crossing just as somebody was walking on it because we misjudged the moment. We've all driven down the road and the phone's gone and we've touched it. We've all driven down the road and the car is doing 34 in a 30. Everybody has done it. And anybody who hasn't, I don't know where you were living or what you were doing. We've all done it. And if we haven't done it in the United Kingdom, we've done it in another country where we were driving on the opposite side of the road and we didn't quite understand the system and we did it there. But we've all made mistakes and we've all paid a price for that. Sometimes we're lucky we get let off. But in the world that we live in today, everything is about enforcement. You can go into the ULEZ zone in many cities and the ultra low emission zone and you get a fine. So I'm helping people, and unfortunately, we love the word "he's a criminal," "she's a criminal," "they are a criminal." We're all criminals. We're all criminals. Some of us have been caught, some of us haven't. That's the reality of it. Every time you break the speed limit, that is under the Road Traffic Act, which is very, very simple, a criminal offence. So, yeah, am I helping? I'm helping people like you or me who don't understand, or I'm helping people like you or me who have made mistakes. There occasionally one comes along and quite frankly, he's a moron or she's a moron or the company's a moron or they think it's unfair and they scream and shout like a little child, that little nursery rhyme, and I think I'll go and eat worms. And sometimes we have to say to them, if you want us to help you, we will help you, but you need to understand from this moment forward, you need to change. We're going to tell you what you need to do and you need to implement, and you're going to need to do those things. Because if you're not willing to commit to that, then it is hypocrisy for me to help you, for you to continue doing the same thing just to get your fine changed or removed or lowered or whatever. And I remember a case 4 years ago where the landlord, quite frankly, after the 7 or 8 years of the council doing nothing, even though they sent a letter every year saying we have robust enforcement, he was ill. He wasn't going to do anything about it. But there were people living in the property. So we worked with his daughter and we got his daughter trained. We showed her what needed to be done. We made sure the whole house was made suitable and safe. And then the license was applied for and it was granted in the name of the daughter, who was far more qualified than her father, corporately very clever, lived locally. The tenants loved her more than the father. She understood what she needed to do, and we solved it. Now, that was one example. We've had others where we've got to the point where we realize they're never going to change. And we know they can't change. And we also know that the council is just going to go through their portfolio one after the other until they literally nearly put them out of business. Do we help those people? We sometimes let them come to us and we start to help them and then we realize what they are. We will dispense of those people who are not caring for the tenants as they're supposed to and not complying. Because if they're not going to change, it's not going to get any better. And I think it's a big message to the local housing authority when a firm such as Landlord Licensing and Defence withdraws its representation in the middle of an investigation or an appeal to the tribunal. Why? I have to leave that to everybody's imagination, but you can work out why I may not want to help somebody who doesn't want to be compliant. Yeah, I'm not going to help the bad people. I'm going to help the people who want to change, want to get on. We all make mistakes. But if you want to continue to rent out death traps and not do what is required, and you won't take advice or you think it's too costly, then unfortunately, no. You know, we get landlords going, oh, but the tenant this and the tenant that, and the tenant's a fraud and the tenant that. The law doesn't care about what the tenant does. The law cares about what the landlord should have done according to the law. And if the tenant doesn't report something and you don't inspect regularly, well, you know, as the judges say, show me your management reports of how many times you inspected this year, showing me that there were no problems and this is a one-off. I can then consider that you may have a reasonable excuse. But if you're not evidencing your management, then there's going to be more enforcement. So no, do we help the bad ones? Yeah, we help people who make mistakes. Yes, everybody makes a mistake. And I will be glad to tell you there are some of the nicest, bestest people out there have made mistakes. Right? It hasn't destroyed their life because they learned from it and moved on and did what was necessary. But that is what's required in this day and age.
Yeah, I was just wondering, in your experience, and bearing in mind you see cases where problems come up, what percentage of landlords you deal with fit into the category of maliciousness? I'm not going to do that, compared to I've made a mistake, I didn't realise.
It's a small percentage, and I could make up a number here and tell you a number straight away. I could say 10%, 15, 20%. None of them would be accurate because I haven't analysed it, but it's something we should look at. But it is a small percentage, and they're generally people are also frustrating to deal with. They're very frustrating to deal with, and they always want to win. They always want to be better. They don't understand that sometimes success comes from both sides having something they can live with and move forward, rather than one side winning and one side losing. You know, it's very, very important.
Yeah,
and till you get that mindset right, it's never going to work.
Yeah. Great. So also at the moment, more tenant organisations now are pushing for more controlled rents and more controlled obligations. Is this a good thing, bad thing from your perspective?
There are various viewpoints, but with regards to the likes of rent controls are going to cause the same problems that they've already caused in Scotland. They're going to cause the same problems of those who will remember the prohibition in the United States, where they banned the sale of alcohol.
Oh, come on, you're not that old.
I'm not that old, but it's a very, very interesting. Look what happened when that happened. The sale of alcohol didn't stop, it slowed down, but the cost of alcohol became premium. It was controlled by criminal organizations, as they call them. You could obtain it. Those criminal organizations grew into other businesses as well and more control. And it just went underground. And what happens with rent controls and those sorts of things is, as has been seen in other countries, it causes more illegal subletting and more issues. And although you create additional licensing schemes to try and cover those things, it's just going to change the way things are done. People are not going to continue to work without the relevant money to make money. If businesses are unable to make money because of rent controls, because costs are going up all around them, well, It's illegal to run a business insolvently.
Yep.
So what happens then? So who's suffering here, the tenant or the landlord? Everybody's suffering.
Yeah.
Because the property has become insolvent, receivers will be appointed. Receivers will want to sell with vacant possession. So the people will be there. The council will then get the problem of where they've got a duty under prevention of homelessness, which they seem to forget as well. And it astounds me how many councils do not work with the two sides that are opposing one another. And I've had this conversation with the London Council recently, and he could not believe what I was saying to him. And he was like, "We never thought about that. We never thought about taking a room out of an HMO because we want it to be 8.5 meters, and law says it needs to be 6.51 square meters. Oh, we never thought by taking it out that would be causing a homelessness problem." What? What world was he living in? What did he think he was doing? Oh, I didn't realise. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, buddy, wake up. Wake up. He's no cleverer than the idiot teenager who goes out with a knife. Oh, I didn't realise I'd go to jail.
Yeah.
He's just stupid. Absolutely stupid. So I think those are some of the problems. I think tenants are right in some areas. Yeah, if your landlord's not doing what he should be doing, yes, you should be campaigning for it. Should you then become vicious enough and go for as much money as you can with a no-win, no-fee disrepair claim firm and a rent repayment order and all the other things? Well, if you want to stay there, you've still got Section 21 where he can remove you when the time is right. Two, is that any way to treat somebody? Maybe it was just a mistake. I think tenants need to start looking at landlords and go, that landlord is also someone's dad or mum or aunt or uncle, someone trying to feed a family. And if you're so vicious, I am a real believer of what goes around comes around. And please do not think that your life will be perfect going forward. The landlord might let you stay another 10 years. He might let you stay another 15 years. But it doesn't really matter. At some stage, your life will come where someone will do something where you made a mistake, you did something wrong, and it will happen. I think the tenant organizations, there's one out there, one particular one, they are so vocal. The leader is so vocal. He's helped councils. And quite frankly, if he understood that some of his staff are suggesting landlords commit crimes and illegal acts, which we have written evidence of, he may not be so vocal about landlords. Yeah, so I really do think the time has come for some of these people to sit down with the landlord organizations and have civilized, grown-up conversations instead of this mudslinging, I've got bigger muscles than you, etc. And the government has got to stop funding tenant organizations if it's not going to fund landlord organizations as well.
Yeah. Yeah, it should be
That is prejudice. That is prejudice.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. But yeah, it always seems to be the landlord. It's always seen to be the bad one, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
But you mentioned their disrepair claims because they're on the up as well at the moment. And how should landlords be approaching this when they receive that dreaded letter from a solicitor looking to both from the tenant's perspective as well as the council's bank account?
Well, disrepair isn't something new. It's something that is going to happen. Every property is going to have something go wrong. A cupboard door is going to fall off in the kitchen. A balustrade's something's gonna. You're going to carry something up the stairs and you're not going to one of the stems out. A door is going to get stuck. The bath is you're gonna make a mistake. The toilet's going to get blocked and the water's going to come out and through the ceiling. All of these things are going to happen at some stage. It's just life. They happen to people who own their own homes. They're going to happen to tenants. They're going to happen for landlords to deal with them. It's whether you address them and deal with them quickly. And for landlords who receive that dreaded letter, the first thing you should do is sit down, take a deep breath, and read it 3 times. With a notepad next to you as well, and make notes about what is it they're actually saying. Because sometimes it's a bigger problem then you'll make that bigger problem you're realizing. And other times it's a smaller problem that you're realizing, and you're reading the big problem that's there. And of course, they're going to go for the biggest number possible. So sit down, read it, understand it, and then immediately seek professional advice from people who actually defend these types of claims. Do not go down the road to the local solicitor who knows nothing about disrepair, who's going to learn about it at your cost, who's going to make arguments and follow a process that's going to end up with two sides in a court where all the only people who are really going to win are the two solicitors.
Yeah.
Because today I saw a claim, the tenant is happy with £3,500. The solicitor for the tenant wants £8,500 plus VAT for a much smaller claim. Why? So the solicitor's made all the money, and who's paying that? Well, the solicitor's getting paid a percentage of the settlement from the tenant on a no-win, no-fee basis, and they're getting all their costs, generally most of the time, thumb in the air, because none of them ever wants to supply the true figure. And so they're getting all of that on top of the fee they agreed with the tenant. And they get all of that added together and they go, oh, thank you very much. Yeah. These lawyers are parasites. They have got no care for the landlord. So do not try and fight them. Now, I don't know who the best fighters are in the world, but there was a boxing match recently between a Ukrainian and a Briton, and the Ukrainian won, even though the Briton was very well a world title holder and all of those things. Why would a landlord go in the ring against a boxer who is a world champion? And most of these solicitors are a no-win, no-fee. They have systems and processes that make them like going into the ring with a world champion and you don't know how to box. So find somebody who knows how to deal with them and somebody who doesn't even get in the ring with them. Somebody who says there's a way to deal with this. And it always reminds me of the story of the hotel in Las Vegas of Evander Holyfield and Mike Tyson. And they were in as the Americans call it, an elevator. And they both were in the elevator. And as they came out onto the ground floor, into the lobby where all the people were waiting, one turned to the other, said, when we go out of this lift or this elevator, there's going to be a lot of people here who would normally pay a lot of money to see us fight. We ain't doing it for free. And so they walk out and they're like the best of buddies. Now, you've got to have the right mindset. You've got to understand what you're doing. And most of these lawyers, they are professional boxers, but when they're not in the ring, there's a whole different way to deal with them. And if you don't know the language, the ways, the means, the opportunities, and how to get to something that both sides can live with, then you're never going to get a settlement, and you need a professional to do that. And that's why I would say seek professional advice. If you are in disrepair and you haven't fixed it, get writing down a chronology of exactly what's happened and when. You better have reports as to when things were reported, when you dealt with them, etc. For a landlord who's got worries about tenants and any of those things, if you're not keeping logs of each time they report something, how you responded, the time you responded, what you responded with, the action you took, and how it was resolved, you really don't have a very good defense. But if you've got better data than the tenant, and most tenants have good data, you don't have better data, you're likely it's going to cost you more. The better the data, the better your defense, the more you're going to likely win or come to a better agreement. But if you are in disrepair, and disrepair simply means it's not as it's supposed to be. So if on the wall behind me there was a water stain, that would be disrepair. Now, would you rather pay 80 quid for someone to come in and get a roller and roller it over so it looks right? Or would you rather give 3 or 4 grand to somebody because you couldn't spend 80? Landlords, you're investors. Come on. It's not investing if you're giving all your money away to the tenants in compensation and fines to the council. Come on. Yeah. So, I joke, but there are some people, they just can't, the investor head disappears the moment the tenant starts.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And then it's forgotten about. But as you say, all properties are going to need work and repair from time to time. And yes, obviously doing the inspections of the property are necessary. But is there anything else a landlord can do to make sure they don't become a victim of disrepair claims?
Absolutely. I think it's very important in the selection of the tenants at the very beginning. And many people are entrusting that to people who don't have a good process for checking, understanding, and knowing about the people. They don't do enough interview of the tenant.
Mm,
So they don't find out about the tenant's history and stories. And I think, although it takes more time, the cost doesn't happen because when they understand you and you've built rapport, one, they will report things to you, finding out about their previous landlord, finding about how their previous landlord dealt with things. Just a simple question. So, in your last place, I guess you had a good landlord, or did you have one where they didn't do all the repairs? Oh, he was absolutely terrible. Oh, he's terrible. We'd call him out and he wouldn't come for 3 weeks. And when he'd come, he wouldn't bring the right things. And 6 to 7 weeks later, in the end, I had to call the council out and I had to get a no-win fee, no lawyer to sort him out. And that was another nightmare. And then eventually I got, hold a second, even though the landlord was wrong, and they were right to do what they did, do I really want you in my property examining everything? Or do I want you in, but now I know where I stand?
yeah.
Yeah, maybe I need a 24-hour, 7 days a week, 365 days a year answering service to answer your calls. And I need to have some automation processes that forward it through to that. And I probably need a software system for management for that. Yeah, so I would suggest that if you're looking to make things better, get clever systems out there. There are systems like Coho, Connection, and that are out there that are really good, who are enhancing with artificial intelligence so that they can preempt what's happening, they can move them forward, they can, based upon how things are reported, they can instruct contractors to come out. Some of them, I pretty much know that some of them can even take the tenant to a point where they can order the product to be delivered the next day if it's, say, a replacement of a washing machine or something like that. So use the tools that are out there. It's worth every penny. If you're an investor, be an investor. But the key is attention to detail, setting out the process and procedure with the tenants, having processes with them, and letting them know that you do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And when you get to 6, if it's not being sorted, what the escalation is, so that the point of needing to seek third-party advice from maybe the local housing authority, that sits at 8 or 9 on the list. Because if you haven't set that out with them, it could be number 1 on their list because they go online and they go, house disrepair problems, call the council, or house disrepair problems, go to a solicitor. But if you've outlined it for them, and it's laid out in documentation, which they can easily access, and maybe put a QR code on the wall in the hallway, so then there's they scan it and it takes them to a website and they can fill it all in immediately. And then guess what? It might also have the procedure in there as well. So if you lead them through using the tools that you see on the internet every day, why would they be calling anybody else but you? Why would you not be responding, and why wouldn't you make it work? And if you're going on holiday for 2 weeks, good luck with that. Make sure you've got somebody else to run your life. You wouldn't leave your child at home for 2 weeks, so without a babysitter, babysit your business because it's your income.
No,
You know,
very
I
good
know
point.
you're laughing, but it's obvious. Half this conversation, a stand-up comic could make a wonderful show out of one day.
No, you're absolutely right. And I think one of the key things you said there is just actually having a chat before you sign a new tenant up, just to get a feeling of their sort of attitudes, if you like.
Yeah.
They can have great credit references and all the rest of it, but if they've
Yeah.
got the wrong attitude and it's going to be a fight from day one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We love the hybrid word. We love the word hybrid at the moment. One of the most successful landlords I know is hybrid. He is working with the agent, and they're doing the particular jobs they do particularly well, and it works really, really well. Some agents don't like it, but some landlords want to be more involved. And if they want to be involved, you've got to agree the terms of engagement because none of us likes people interfering. Nobody likes people micromanaging us. So you decide what's going to be done and you work as a team. When you work as a team, things get done really well.
So you talk about actually landlords getting involved, working with the agent, maybe doing the initial interview with prospective tenants themselves.
Yeah, there's no reason why a landlord can't be present when people are being qualified. I think the biggest problem is viewings are given away too easily. Yeah.
Okay.
People are letting people view without having qualified them properly. And because I wouldn't let you have a viewing until I know so much about you, I wouldn't even reveal the full address. Because if I'm renting a property to you, I want to know that you're going to pass all of the stuff. Why would I show you around, spend an hour of my time showing you around with traveling there, traveling back, and showing you around and answering all your questions? I know it's all great for building rapport, but let's work out how compliant you are as a tenant at the beginning. Let's take you through a process. I have a set process and a procedure where they go through so that when people come for a viewing, I know that they are in a position to take it. And the only thing that's going to change it now is that our property hasn't been better than something else they've already seen. And the question that quite often I would ask is, so how many properties, final part, and I'd already know the answer to the question before I asked it at a viewing, and this is what I train staff to do as well and agents to do. So you've looked at 4 properties already, or you've looked at 3, or whatever number they've got. How does this one compare to the other ones? And then snip these lips and let them talk. If they talk for 20 minutes, that's 20 minutes of either them convincing themselves they don't want it or convincing themselves they don't want it until they convince themselves that actually, in reality, they do want it. Because you're going to note what they're saying in your mind mentally, and then you're going to ask questions about it. So the bedroom that you said the other one's a little bit bigger in comparison to the bedroom here, how does it fit logistically for the facilities in the HMO? Or how does it fit in relation to the bathroom? How does it, etc.? The kitchen diner. Ask questions and they go, do you know, well, you mentioned it. I hadn't thought about that. Now you haven't even seen the other place. What you've done is made them think about the other place and think about what's in front of them. And they go, you know, and then eventually they say yes. Now, one of the things we were very good at doing at that point was getting them to agree to sign up to transfer the money. We had tablets. We use a tablet and we'd have documentation there. We'd then immediately send them all the prescribed information, the pre-tenancy information that they needed. We'd then get them to sign for that electronically, either there or most of the time we'd get it done the next day. They'd sign that they'd received everything they needed to, so we knew that legal part was done. Yeah. We'd then go through the process and go through and present them the tenancy. We'd then get that back from them, and then when they moved in, on the day of move-in, we'd also take them through another checklist, which they signed on the tablet, and they would tick off all the things about the house that they've been shown and confirm and re-see all the prescribed information in the tenancy agreement, the terms upon those. So all of this was to make sure that at no point could the tenant at any stage ever say that the things weren't done correctly. And the accolade for us was when we had a visiting professor from to Kingston University. And every year he comes to live in the Kingston area near London. And he said, in 10 years, I have been renting houses and rooms. No one has ever taken me through the process the way that you do. I love your business model. And he's invited me to come and talk at Kingston University to his business students on our business model that was so successful.
Wow.
Right? There is a method to it. And that's how you have good tenants, no issues, no problems. And when that call comes, you need to send somebody, you know you're not sending them on what we used to call a wild goose chase. So it's very, very important. So management systems, good qualification, A good team, whether that's your own staff or a team through an agent, who do all the things that need to be done. It's people who pay attention to detail, want to outperform everybody else and provide the best service. And if your team doesn't want to do that, maybe they're in the wrong team.
You got the wrong team. Yeah.
Those things.
So as we've been talking about, being a landlord has got many different facets to it. So what's the most important area that landlords can focus on from your perspective that will make everything else easier?
There's only one thing: compliance. Compliance, 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 more compliance, and more compliance. It is the only defense. And if you look at the financial crisis that we had, and all the blame and all the fingers going like this, that it's this one, that one, the other one, in reality, whatever happened, every single one of the financial organizations, everything they did had gone through its compliance department, so it was compliant. Think about that. The greatest financial crisis in modern times, and everybody was compliant because it went through the compliance process. So if people are interested in compliance, we'll start setting up something to show you how to do compliance properly, because it is very much a closed shop to the local authorities. They come to meetings, they don't really want to train properly. None of the people who go on these courses with the local authorities come out going, wow, I know exactly what to do now, because the local authority isn't a landlord. They don't know, nor have they had 30 years experience to do that. So compliance, compliance, compliance is the only defense against enforcement. Compliance, compliance, compliance.
Yeah, not quite as sexy as location, but when it actually comes down to it, if you're not location, you're not compliant.
Yeah, but remember, when we live our life, we want our family to be compliant, our children to be compliant, and we have a happier life when they are compliant. When we're compliant to our wives and our children and our duties, they're happy too. So at the end of the day, compliance is something we know it works, and we know that when we're not compliant, we get in trouble. So it's ingrained in us from a very, very early age. And, from being on time for school to not answering the teacher back to eating all your vegetables, we've learned it all. So it's not like we've got an excuse, is it?
No, you're right. And we are very compliant in so many different aspects of our lives automatically. But for this, for some reason, it seems to be, people don't look at it in the same way at all.
Well, many people in property get into property, and we drive on the left in the United Kingdom. Yeah. And we drive on the left. And if you drive on the left with a right-hand drive car, it's very, very easy to drive on the left. If you decide that you want to drive on the right, just because you've got a left-hand drive car, i.e. you've got a different way of thinking or driving yourself, well, I'm sorry, even left-hand drive cars have to drive on the left in the United Kingdom. But what people do is they come into property, they hear new ideas, they try new things, and they're like driving the wrong way down the motorway or driving on the wrong side of the road. And we've seen it all in the movies. It leads to great entertainment, but it always ends with someone having a major crash.
Very good point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like that.
Always. Even in Roland, which was a great chase through Paris. Everybody loved it. One of the greatest ever seen on TV. We all know there were some crashes. Which one are you going to be? The star of the crash? A victim of the crash? You've got to decide. But if you're not going to be compliant, you are going to have enforcement problems and you are going to have a crash.
Cool. No, you're absolutely right. It's been brilliant talking to you about this as always. Always slightly scary as well, I must admit. Before we finish though, how can viewers and listeners get hold of you if they've got any other questions at all?
Well, the easiest way is to call the office on 0208 088 3400. That's 0208 088 3400. If the lines are busy or you get the voicemail, it's because everybody's on the telephone. That happens some days. Just leave a message. Just leave your name, your number, speaking clearly, and we will get back to you. Every single person in the office receives a message when a voicemail has been left, so we know you've called. Sometimes it's not immediate. We can call you back. It'll be a little while. By far the easiest thing to do is go to our website, and that's landlords-defence.co.uk. That's landlords, plural, defence.co.uk. That's defence with a C. That's how it's spelled in England. So it's landlords-defence.co.uk. And if you select there, if you select go to contact, you can select a 10-minute diagnosis call. There's even a button near my head, apparently, and a video in the top right-hand corner. You can book a 10-minute diagnosis call, and that allows you somebody to go through and triage your situation and tell you what the next best logical step is for you to take. And whether that's you need to call the council, call the tenant, you need to explore what the license needs to do, you need to talk to a specialist or a consultant, or you need a survey. Whatever it is you need to do, that will be gone through what's happened with you. It's a simple process they follow, and then they'll show you or tell you what you need to do or who you need to call or what number you need to call from there. That video I mentioned is quite an interesting video, and it's not one I chose, but it was a video I made one morning when I was walking in Eton near Windsor, and it was just after a case that had happened that I'd been at tribunal, where I talk about the more they spoke, the worse it got. The more they said, the worse it got. The more it said, the worse it got. And that really came from a case which I was called in halfway through the tribunal to represent the landlord, who was clearly guilty but wasn't complying with the directions. And but the more he said, the worse it got. And the more he said, the worse it got. And I just kept, it was just like, will you shut up, mister? That's all I kept thinking. In the end, I did shut him up, and we did solve it. But the problem was that chap ended up, and it was nothing to do with me. He had a £5,000 rent repayment order, which he was guilty of. But because of his talking so much and arguing so much and need to be right rather than to fix the problem, he ended up with a £26,000 legal bill from the tenant solicitors that the tribunal decided to award, and then 4 more tenants who were also going to take between £5,000 and £6,000 each. So when it says seek professional advice rather than talk, all he had to do was seek professional advice in the first place, and that matter could have been solved. He would have saved at least £26,000, maybe another 20 on top of that. But that's why I mention it. Please be compliant. We've got great thinking, but the thinking that you have in other parts of your life, including being a landlord, does not fit in the area of law, of housing enforcement and rent repayment. It just hasn't worked. We've worked this out over a number of years, and you need the professional advice. So good luck with it. And Dave, do let me know if you need any help with those 2 letters you received.
I will do indeed. So that's been brilliant, Des. Really lovely talking to you. And landlords-defence.co.uk. Compliance, compliance, compliance. Love it.
You said it all. In a little over an hour, you've learned everything.
I know that has been brilliant, Des. Thank you so much for your time. Really interesting. And yeah, I look forward to catching you next time.
All right, brilliant. Thanks a lot, David.
All right then. Cheers. Bye.
Bye.